Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Pierre Pradervand. Hello, Pierre.
Hello there.
Hello. And your book is here with me, this
Yes.
beautiful, funny cover, and it is called The Gentle Art of Spiritual Discernment. Um, the title in itself, I think, is very intriguing. So tell us about the title. What is spiritual discernment? What do you
Well,
mean?
first, I'd like to say that the title I suggested to the American publisher was "How to Find Your Spiritual Path," and I have another book called "The Gentle Art of Blessing," which was somewhat of a bestseller, and they are just bringing it out in an audio version. And they thought they'd like to sort of use the carrying capacity of the former title for this book. So we had quite I won't say a struggle, but an intense exchange. And finally, I thought, well, they know their American public. I'm in my little Switzerland. So I said, okay, what counts for me is that the book came out. And I love the cover.
Yes, and at this time of year to
Yes,
pick is just a joy. You do talk about spiritual discernment, though, in your book.
yes.
And I think the concept is very interesting. Tell us about it.
Well, I believe Byron Katie, by the way, is a woman who has influenced me enormously. Byron Katie is one of the sages of the American personal development scene. I don't know if she's still active, but one thing she said at least 30 years ago has been a leading star in my whole life. She said the number one problem in the world is not war or poverty or climate issues. The number one problem in the world is confusion. And I believe this is more and more true every day. We have never lived in a world with so many opinions circulating, and this has doubled or trebled since the invention of internet. She said that long before internet. I don't know what she'd say today, but it is on any topic, including, for instance, in the medical field, COVID, you'll find extreme opinions by highly qualified, sincere people. And how does the unspecialized layman or laywoman like you or me decide what is right? That's why discernment is a number one quality. And for me, that discernment comes from a very clear vision of your goals in life and a deep listening. I have been very influenced, and I still continue, by an American mystic called Joel Goldsmith. He is the creator of a teaching which was called, in the last century, the infinite way. And he was invited all over the planet to speak. He was also an extraordinary healer. At one time, he was receiving over 100 calls per day for healing, and most were healed, some instantaneously. And he speaks of, he had at one period of his life, a very, very busy schedule from morning till evening, even at lunchtime. And one day he arrives at lunchtime or at midday, and he looks at his schedule, and for the first time ever, he didn't have a single appointment between 12 and 1 o'clock. And that had never happened before. And he said, oh, I think it's somebody upstairs who arranged that. He'd just received the morning and evening before 39 calls for healing. And he decided that he'd use that 1 hour just to go into silence. And he plunged into silence. And something amazing happened. And in the early afternoon, nearly every single one of those 39 people who called for help called to say they'd been healed, and he hadn't even thought of a single one of them. And another amazing thing about this healer is that he said as soon as he received a call for help, he would forget the name of the person and the problem he was supposed to heal. And that was extraordinary. And I thought, I had this deep, deep yearning. Oh, I would so like to experience this quality of silence. And for me, deep yearning is a fundamental quality of the religious life, spiritual life. And I yearned for this. And I had one of the 3 powerful mystical experiences of my life. I went into the silence, and suddenly, Anna, I was in a space of such incredible beauty and color and silence, and just, it was paradise. And I don't even know how long it lasted, because I was out of time, out of space. And suddenly I came back to my room, to my seat, to my activities. And that's one of the 3 powerful mystical experiences of my life. And a mystical experience is something very special from the point of view of knowledge, because it has nothing to do with intellectual knowledge. And I have a doctorate, and I've done a lot of all this doctorate stuff and studying and writing a huge dissertation, which I, by the way, threw away 20 years ago because I realized it was just a form of vanity. So I threw away the last copy of my dissertation. And this quality of silence, I think, for me, is the essence of the spiritual life. Reaching that quality of silence where you are really, really listening. And I was saying, the mystical experience is a form of knowledge that has no other comparison. It's just there. You have to have had a mystical experience to know what it means. I've had 3 in my life, and this was one of them.
You, in your book, talk about an out-of-body experience as well. Tell us about that.
Okay, that was the first mystical experience. I was in Africa attending the meeting of the largest grassroots peasant farmer organization of the continent, based in the Sahel, of which I was one of the founding members. And I'd attended the meeting, which was in Burkina Faso, that's a country in the Sahel. And the last afternoon was free, and I caught dysentery. Now, at the beginning, it's not serious, but it's a nuisance because you have to run to the toilet the whole time. And at that time, I was healing myself by a purely spiritual method. I never went to the doctor. And I worked with my texts, my prayers, my mantras, and all that the whole afternoon, and I thought it had disappeared. And the next day, going to the airport, it started again. And on the plane, I was working with my mantras, my text, and all that. And I was sitting next to an unattended young boy. I mean, he was traveling unattended. He was about 7, 8 years old, maybe 9. And he had a little, a little thing on his chest with his name and all that. The stewardess taking care of this young boy was so kind with him. I've never seen anything like that. And one moment she came to speak to him with a special gentleness. And suddenly I felt for this woman a gratitude I'd never felt before in my life. And it became suddenly cosmic. I was out of my body. I was no longer in the plane and in a space where there was only the most infinite love. Love was the only substance, the only presence, the only law, the only power, the only aim, the only reality. And the most wonderful thing, I was one with this love, and Pierre Pradervand had totally disappeared. I had no more any sense of existing as a little Swiss gentleman with his red passport. I was just there as the presence of love, enjoying love. And it was amazing. I don't know how long it lasted, whether it was 5 minutes, 2 minutes, half an hour. And suddenly I was back in the plane on my seat. I felt something moving in my entrails. The dysentery disappeared in a matter of seconds. But above all, I'd had the most powerful mystical experience of my whole lifetime. That is an anchor in my life, in my spiritual life. And I believe we are here to express love and merge totally with love. And there is absolutely nothing else. And that only love will heal the world in which we live.
Well, we certainly need heaps of it at the moment.
We always have.
We always have, yeah. Listening to you, there were a number of things. And the first was where you were talking about the silence,
Yeah.
importance of that silence. And I think that's something that we really struggle with in our time.
Oh, yes.
There's so much noise around us, noise literally, as in we can hear so much going on. And once upon a time, people would go home, but there were no radios, let alone TVs and internet and everything else. Now, not only are there the devices that we listen to at home, but people are actually walking around with them in the
Yes,
street. And
absolutely.
and the and to me, what is a complete source of amusement and bewilderment is people walking around with headphones when they're in woodland and beaches. They're not even listening to the natural sounds around them. So,
Exactly.
so I think it's it's this need for silence so that we can actually come back to ourselves and our own thoughts. But then, of course, and then there is the lack of silence in our minds because our minds are busy, 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 busy. How do you, what do you suggest to help people come to that inner silence?
Well, the only thing is practice, practice, practice. In any sphere of life, if you want to progress, you have to put in a pretty big amount invest a pretty big amount of time and willingness and desire and aim, sense of what am I aiming for? But once you have encountered the deep silence, there's nothing else you want more in life. I start my meditation every morning by a moment of silence. And again, I mentioned this mystical experience of silence I had. which was so extraordinary. And when you've experienced that, you cannot yearn for anything of all these goodies that the commercial world wants to catch you with. They have no taste. I think I could live on a desert island with nothing, just knowing I have this connection with the source, which is all around.
It's so true about practice, because we can think of it as a practice of embodying the spiritual principles which we purport to want to follow. And it's true that sometimes it's easier than others. You have to practice. So yes, it's the idea of practice is very important. And there are times when it can take me 5 minutes to settle my mind, and there are times when it can take me 10 minutes to settle my mind. So that idea of practice and not giving in and thinking, oh, I can't do it. So
Right.
tell us about your spiritual quest. How did this happen?
Well, my spiritual quest started many, many years ago. I was raised in a very traditional Presbyterian family. My father was a minister, and I went to even studied 2 years theology, all the traditional stuff. And I believed that words were important and the right formulas, what we call religion. And then when I was 23, 24, I quit the whole thing and didn't find, I lived without any spirituality in my life for quite a few years. When I came to the United States, I'd been offered a scholarship at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And I went to 3 different spiritual groups, a group called the Word of God, which was something extraordinary. It was a group of 4 students who started praying for the campus. And this little group became the largest student movement on campus by the time I was there. That was the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And they had meetings once a week. And the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life happened when I was attending one of these meetings. Someone speaking in tongues. You know, the New Testament speaks about that. People speaking a tongue that nobody understands. And Anna, this was the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life, in my whole life. And I've heard so many varied forms of music. I've traveled, worked, studied, lived in for about 40 countries of 5 continents. I've never heard. I can still remember that today. It is still the summit of the beauty I've ever heard in my life. And somebody started translating afterwards what the person had said. And then I was at the same time attending the Quaker meeting. I love the Quakers because of their simplicity, and it is walk your talk. It's not the right theology. The only thing that counts is walking your talk. And the meetings are 1 hour in silence with occasionally somebody getting up to share a few inspired thoughts. And I was going to, at the same time, to a healing movement called Christian Science, because I was a hypochondriac. I was raised to run to the doctors for the slightest problem, and that really bothered me. And I heard in this meeting, this student meeting, the most incredible testimonies. People breaking their leg and walking normally 3 days later. And I mean, such incredible testimonies that the little hypochondriac rascal inside me just ran away. And I practiced this spiritual healing for many, many years. So, whereas I lost the train of my thought. Yes, so these were the three basic spiritualities I studied at that time. And ever since then, I've been a spiritual student, a student of spirituality, and I make a clear difference between spirituality and religion, because religion is the group organization of a certain number of beliefs around a certain tradition and certain way of doing things and a certain way of praying to a deity, and it can become very rigid, and it has alas encouraged, enhanced, caused so many wars in human history. So now I've created my own form of spirituality, which suits me. For me, spirituality is a very personal pursuit, and that's what I continue.
You talk about it being a very personal pursuit, which of course it is. And I think that ties into how to find our way out of confusion. So we talk about the importance of silence so that we can begin to reconnect with ourselves, our higher selves, with the divine.
Yes.
What else can we do to help ourselves discover where we stand in the world?
Well, one thing that in my practice of spirituality, this is something you find in a good many spiritual traditions, is to take every hour or 2 hours, I do it every 2 hours, a moment of pause to reconnect with your spiritual source. And for me, this is fundamental. And the other aspect is, in my book, I speak of Brother Lawrence, this cook in a French convent in the 17th century, who's become world known because his kitchen became a temple, and his practice was just the presence of God. And his kitchen became his form of going to church, if I can say. And people from the high levels of society came to consult this simple friar because he was so illumined by this presence. And he is one of my sources of inspiration.
That's a really important point, because what you're saying is that it's up to us to imbue whatever we're doing with spirituality.
Exactly. Absolutely. Ultimately, everything, I believe, everything can have a spiritual dimension. I have a book called 365 Blessings to Heal the World and Myself. And that's my former book in English, the earlier book before this latest one. And I have 365 blessings, one for each day. And there's a blessing for making love. So I think you can make love with utter, total sensuality, or you can also make it and transform it into a spiritual experience. Each one chooses. what she or feels right for him or herself.
I think the bottom line here is there are no shortcuts, and there's no point in following a religion because that is telling you how you must live rather than you having that personal connection with a source of love and goodness. And I think when we have that, that's very valuable because it's focusing on love rather than when we create dogma, which is divisive. It creates a sense of this is the way and the only way, and you're either with us or against us. And whether it is through ideology or religious dogma, we need to be aware that that's adding to the confusion rather than creating a clear path of living a life centered around love and unity.
Yes, Anna, but I still believe that many people will need religion for some times, because you and I are privileged to have had a very good education. I don't know what is your educational path, but I assume you've had a pretty good education. Otherwise, you couldn't do such a good interview. And most people, I'm thinking of very simple street sweepers, farmers, workers in factories, who have never had the opportunity to really grow spiritually, but they feel some spiritual need. And I think religion can offer something, even with its tremendous limits, it can still offer something they need.
And I would agree with that because but always with everything, it depends on the person who is teaching or leading, and it's a door that's open. I consider myself to have been most fortunate in my Catholic education, in that I had the joy of beautiful teachers who encouraged us to think for ourselves and to question. And so that was the beginning of my spiritual path opening up. So I think it's about being open to other points of view of the world. And I love in your book the story that you tell when you were a young man and you met a Muslim Imam,
Yes,
and how that transformed you. So yes, I think the idea is that religion is for many a good doorway into something else.
exactly.
What we need to do is to have that open mind and to understand the essence of the teachings that are there. So I think that that's very important. Tell us the story about this beautiful imam whom you met.
Well, I was living in Dakar, Senegal, between two shanty towns. And I mean really two shanty towns. They didn't have any water, they didn't have any latrines. Fortunately, it was just next to a beach, so the people of the shanty town would go on the beach and the beach would clean up the mess. But it was really more than primitive living conditions. And I became acquainted with a group of young men from one of the shanty towns, and they started meeting in my home. Every Saturday we had a Moroccan tea, green tea, and we'd have great discussions. And one of them was a very lively young man, and his father was the Imam of one of the shanty towns, a very gentle, kind man. And one day at that time I was in my, still following this Christian Science teaching, and I was so persuaded it was the best thing in the world. And I thought one day, I'm going to ask Imam Sal how Islam defines God. I was so sure we had the best definition in the world. And my self-righteousness, I strode along the beach to his home, and he received me with the usual gentleness. And going along to his home, my mind was very much in the state of mind of the Japanese proverb, which says it's very difficult to describe the vast horizons of the ocean to the frog sitting at the bottom of its well. I was sitting at the bottom of my well of spiritual self-righteousness, and so sure he couldn't beat me in terms of the definition of God. And I arrived, and after the normal greetings, I'd said, Imam Salah, I've come to ask you an important question. How does Islam define God? And he had a reply that stunned me, just knocked me flat. He said, Pierre, if you took the branches of all the trees on the planet and the water of all the oceans and the rivers and the lakes and the streams as ink and the branches as pens, you could not write out all the names of God. In other words, he was saying God is too infinite to be described in human words. And boy, that stunned me and silenced me and made me very humble. So I love that story.
When I read that, it really made me smile. I thought it was beautiful. And in fact, there is much of your book which I find beautiful. And so a reminder to everyone, the book that we are discussing is called The Gentle Art of Spiritual Discernment, and I'll be putting a link to it in the description box. Pierre, if people want to find out more about your work, do you have a website?
Yes, www.gentleartofblessing, all linked, .org.
Is that .com?
.com, yes.
Wonderful.
.org. .org.
Org. Okay.
Org.
I will put a link to that in the description box.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time today.
It's been a great, great joy, Anna. I'm sure you feel it, really.
Indeed, I do. Thank you so much. And
blessings on all those who will be listening to this show.
Thank you again. And thank you all for watching. Now, following on from this conversation, it's very apt that the next one is about the power of pause. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye, Anna. Goodbye, everyone.